What I'm going to talk today about is a little bit looking at what has happened over time, and then also trying to look a little bit ahead, what will be the next big things for procurement in digital. And if you think a little bit about the historic development, there have been a lot of initial, very often automatic improvements in procurement, very often P2P linked, where procurement, so to say, did the first steps in the digital area. 2 years ago, we spoke a lot what we call here the digital era, where there was a lot of acceleration of use cases, significantly more use of solutions, and a lot of impact improvement. We now see the third area starting, and we call this the analytics area. The analytics area is the one where procurement will become a key player in driving cross-operations transformations, which are digital enabled. And what do we mean by this? We mean by this that there are, in 3 dimensions, significant improvements possible on the impact that procurement can generate through digital. One big topic is what we call the inside foresight. Let me give you an example. In the past, very, very often procurement companies thought about the raw material topic as something, if there's volatility in the market, it's not my responsibility. That's something I can't do anything about. Now, in particular since pandemic, there is a lot of companies who now say, we actually need to understand the full impact. Raw material prices change. I need to understand how much they change. I need to understand the implication for production and also for sales. There is automotive companies who now realize we need to discuss with our customers what are the implications, and therefore you need to end-to-end inside foresight. The second big use case or dimension where procurement will be changing through digital going forward is what we call the effectiveness. That's the area of where we are going in much more digital solutions, where we're actually going into real-time interfaces. Let's take the example of shortages we have these days, right? Many industries, segments, and sourcing categories struggle with getting the products or the services. What does it mean for my production planning? Take the example of automotive again, right? The really leading automotive companies, they know whenever there's a shortage on semiconductors, which cars can I not produce in the next couple of months? So there you see procurement will play a significant role in the interfaces in the company. And obviously the third topic is not going away. The automation and efficiency is further improving. And we see less and less people being involved, of course, in the entire transactional procurement area. And bots and things like this will actually drive a lot of improvement there as well. Now, in order to get there and do this as a procurement function, and leaders need to, from our point of view, mainly talk about and consider 3 main changes. The first one is about data taxonomy. That's how I actually get access to my data and manage the interfaces. The second is what we call the tech stack, and I will talk a little bit about what the tech stack is. Many colleagues and clients ask me, what is this tech stack? We will talk about what it means. And then the third one is the operating model, something I talked about already 2 years ago, and we see another shift now in the operating model for procurement. Let's go into more details, just to highlight a little bit what has happened in the past. In the first stage, which you see here, the main digital applications in procurement were around automation, P2P bots, a lot of ERFQ users, but very little on what we called the inside foresight. And the procurement operating model was quite traditional. You had the procurement leadership team with strategic buyers, operational and technical buyers. This has changed in the last couple of years. Significantly more use cases developed, significantly more, in particular, also on inside foresight, understanding cost structures, understanding the risk management, and so on. And you could see how the operating model has evolved. You see significantly more bots helping the transactional buyers to actually further streamline their activities. We see digital tools helping, in particular, the operational buyers, making best use of the data lake and getting the best interface management possible. And we've talked about that last time, 2 years ago. The agile pool is the big topic and has been the big topic in the last 2 years, saying how can strategic buyers actually be much more flexible in where they're actually getting involved in what they do. Now we see the next thing is even going beyond that. And this is what we call the analytics area. The analytics area will talk much more about these cross-functional use cases and a different role that procurement needs to be prepared for to actually capture the opportunities here. Let me make you a little bit more, give you a little more detailed view on what does it concretely mean. Yeah? I talked about the change in data taxonomy, tech stack, and operating model. Today, you see very often functional data taxonomies, saying we basically have a spend cube. In the future, this means we need to actually, as procurement leaders, actually work and enable a real cross-functional, multi-dimensional data lake and data access. Similar on the tech stack. In the past, everyone was talking about, should I use here a single solution, or do I do best of breed, or do I go actually with my cloud-based system? In the future, this will become much more difficult and challenging because we now talk about an integrated technology platform that goes beyond procurement in order to capture the use cases I talked about. And the third thing is, we talked a lot about the operating model. We see there's a next generation of operating model evolvement, which is actually much more enabling the cross-functional way of working. Again, always with a digital angle. Let me illustrate to you a little bit how this looks. On the data taxonomy, what is the typical life of a traditional procurement organization? You need to fix the spend cube. I'm not saying everyone has done it, but the dimensions on supplier data, category data, product data is the thing that everyone tries to solve these days. The next thing will be a really integrated cross-functional cube. Right? And that cube needs to combine the procurement data with supply chain data. So with production data, the same with sales data. If I have a change in my supply chain, what does it mean for my production scheduling? Where do I need to inform my customer? And how do I make sure all of these data actually get together and fit together? That's, we believe, is a big change where we need to get ready as procurement leaders to actually enable this cross-functional data access. The second big thing I talked about is the tech stack. And what I mean with the tech stack is, today you see a lot of procurement organizations who are, rightfully so, investing a lot in getting the next generation of procurement tools and solutions into their organization. This can be parametric clean sheets, meaning I automate the clean sheet and cost structure development. This can be market index management and things like this. In the future, the tech stack, and what I mean with tech stack is the really integrated technology solution of data visualization at the front end, understanding the data transformation in the background, getting access to the data storage wherever it is needed in different functional departments, and obviously having the analytics right. That will require a really cross-functional, integrated tech stack with significantly different and more digital applications compared to what we've seen in procurement so far. And this tech stack development is something that we see a lot of companies now starting to evolve on. I'm not saying it's fixed and done, and it's not easy, but it's an important requirement to actually capture the opportunities. The third topic I talked about is the change in the operating model. And the change in the operating model is something that will always now become, again, I think a little bit of an interesting debate. But if you think about the classical S2P, P2P process, today and in the past, very often the structure is you have your strategic buyers, you have your operational and transactional buyers, and depending on industry, the split is roughly a third, a third, a third, right? A third, at least, you typically have these days as really strategic buyers. So these are the ones who really think long-term about the categories and the opportunities. And you still have a lot of, not too many, but a lot of transactional buyers in the P2B space. If you really think about what these people are doing, you can basically structure this along 4 main topics. There's some people, in particular in P2P, who do very often repetitive tasks. There are some who do what we call the optimization. They continuously try to actually make things more efficient, leaner, get more opportunities, getting faster in RFPs and things like this. And then there is in particular the strategic buyers. What we call today strategic buyers, if you really think what they're doing, is 2 different things. There are buyers who are basically competence people who know something about something in their supplier industry. And then there is the other part of strategic buyer role, which is what we call the creative element. That's the one to really understand what's the next thing that actually I need to think about in terms of market development. What's the next opportunity I have in terms of how I actually work together with my suppliers? Where are the next opportunities further in order to drive costs or manage the supply chain better? In the future, we believe this structure will most likely evolve. And here is how we think about it. We think in the future, you will probably still have some transactional buyers, but no longer 30%. This will be much less. The operational bias will be most likely become replaced or even enhanced by having either data scientists or data translator roles. So these are the people who manage the tech stack, who manage the data interface, the spend cube involvement, and all of these things. And then we believe, and that's obviously something we're going to debate a bit in a minute, is we believe the strategic buyers will need to make a choice. There are even some today who are what we call the subject matter expert buyers, right? The ones who really create their value by competence. And then there's the really creative element. And we see a lot of shift of the resources over time because technology and analytics and data and digital will enable you to become more and more efficient here and actually move your capacity and capability evolvement to the left side of this chart. So what does it mean in practice? How will this look like? Today, the classical category team, I'm not telling you anything new, and this exists like this for 10 or 20 years, consists in your category leadership structure of strategic buyers, operational buyers, transactional buyers. In the future, we think there will be much more category tribes. Category tribes will combine the roles I just described of creative buyers, subject matter expert buyers with the data people, but also with supply chain people, with engineering people, and they all need to actually come together on the relevant topics that we talked about to capture the opportunities in digital in operations. So this shift to category tribes will be an important element for the development of the operating model. Now, if you are now a procurement leader, a CPO, or an important player in how that thinks about the shaping of the procurement organization, we believe that there's three things that should be very high on the agenda. The first one is you should consider and think about how does your ops technology group look like. Ops technology group means that's the integrated setup of people, the cross-functional leadership group that actually thinks about the next generation of opportunities. I come to that in a minute. The second thing is that should be on your mind is the question of how do you actually integrate the digital use cases. There's so many individual solutions. I always surprised by myself how many new ones there are. But in order to get the overview and get the real benefit out of it, the integration will be key. And the third one is, and a lot of discussion has happened in the previous talks today, is obviously about the reskilling of the procurement people. What is the role of the ops technology group? The role is to really continuously scan and figure out what is the new solutions which are out there available. What are the next generation of use cases? What is my North Star in terms of this is where I want to be, and this is where I want to play as a procurement organization in the cross-functional universe, and what does this actually mean for my data? In particular, the enterprise-wide data backbone is something that will be a key enabler in the future to be advanced in this area. So that's where we think an ops technology group, people group of leaders need to actually come together and continuously think about it. The second thing is the integration of the use cases. This is nothing new for you, but I think it will be very important to understand how do these different solutions, not only in procurement, but beyond procurement, actually work together, right? I had the example earlier on raw materials and the implication of volatility. How does the procurement solutions that actually monitor the risk, how do they play with the supply chain? How do they play with production planning? I still see many companies today who struggle with surprising shortages, and that's very often because the different use cases are not talking to each other. And the last but not least, the third one is obviously the reskilling of the workforce. And I know this has been discussed a lot. Linking a little bit to what I've said earlier in terms of what are the next generation people that we need, I think there's three areas where the procurement leaders should think about the development of their organization. One is how do you embed and create this creative business mindset? What I mean with this is procurement people who really take the perspective of a spend entrepreneur, the ones who really think about what's next in my category, what's next on the digital opportunities, and how do I actually get this. Then you do need to do your homework. That's what we call the digital and data savviness, understanding how do I manage the interfaces, what's the data interface. And then there is a new and very important and not easy to get capabilities that needs to actually develop, which is what we call the data engineer. These are the ones who actually understand and analyze and make use of the data to actually use them in the cross-functional discussions. So that's a little bit the cross-functional requirement that is in place, needs to be in place to actually capture the opportunities in the organization. So this was a little bit an overview, what has happened in the past, what's the outlook, and the key question is who and how quickly can you get ready for the opportunities in cross-function digitization from a procurement point of view. Thank you.
Wow, great talk, Jan. Please have a seat and join us for a Q&A, because I saw a lot of interaction happening there. People really loved your talk once again. So are you ready for your first question? Sure. All right, let's have a look. The first question, you talk about the shift from strategic bias to creative and competence bias. How will CPOs identify those types of profiles and candidates? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I think this is very much about the question, where do people get their education and, so to say, cross-functional apprenticeship? Because we see a lot of organizations where procurement people stay in their organization forever, right? But in order to capture these kind of cross-functional opportunities, it's very important to rotate. Very often the creative ones are the ones who have been in R&D, who have been in finance, and understand the other side of the table, and therefore actually can come up and enable this. And the other point is always make sure that you are thinking about people with the right mindset. You can always train the skill, but the mindset is something that you need to actually check in your organization, who has the right way to think about these creative ideas.
Yeah, you hear a lot about that nowadays, right? About the 21st century skills that everyone needs to develop. So it's all about mentality and mindset. But how, if you're talking about the creative mindset to keep them in your business, how do you actually do that? Because it seems to me that the creative people actually might be more sort of job hoppers. So how can you keep them in your company?
Yeah, I think the past where people were just developing throughout the procurement organization to actually become more and more senior and take more responsibility, I think this is a little bit of a traditional model. I think the creative ones are the ones where they define their, so to say, reason for being, not by having a certain competence that I know a certain supplier industry well, but they define their reason for being and value proposition by saying, I can actually bring in new ideas. And this has always been the case. When I started procurement consulting 25 years ago, it was very simple, right? You just had to do some benchmarking and a little bit idea generation. The world moves on continuously. So you need to actually continuously think about, where can I find the next set of opportunities? Everything that you have identified as opportunities today, the competitors will find out soon, as well as the supplier organization will find out soon. So you always need to be a step ahead. And that's what I mean with the creative thinking about where can actually create value in the future.
Yeah, that's about setting that North Star that you were mentioning, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that part in your talk, by the way. I have a second question from Professor Dr. Karsten Mackholz. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Are we still looking that much on effectiveness? He's challenging you, I think. This is the same thing we did for the last decades, right? He mentions. How about carbon neutrality, ESG, etc.?
Yeah, so what I talked about today was indeed that this was the first stage. The stage one of the three was about this effectiveness and becoming more efficient. I think this is something where many organizations, and obviously it varies by industry, meanwhile have done their homework, right? The next thing is indeed the new themes. I have not covered the ESG topic so far. I think it was covered very, very much in other talks earlier today, but it is an important element. And if you think this through, there's even the digital use cases may be sustainability related, they may be carbon related, they may not be savings related only, right? So that's, but what I'm talking about is the backbone to make that happen. That's why you need the data access, that's why you need to actually have the tech stack as an enablement to capture these opportunities on sustainability and similar topics.
Yeah, and to stay open for all these topics.
And also the measurement, I think, where procurement will create value changes a lot. Yeah. Right? We see a lot of procurement leaders who now say, I need to redefine my KPI system. In the past, I was measured on savings and availability and supplier quality. In the future, these are the other dimensions, right? Reducing CO2 in my supply chain. And in order to do this, digital and analytics will become a super important element to actually make that happen.
Yeah, thanks. The third question is from Silke Harold, and the question is, what is your opinion on the automation augmentation paradigm? Is more value added through automation, so less people required, or through augmentation, giving people tools to support their daily work? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this really varies a lot by industry, right? if you are in a business which has a lot of repetitive tasks, like you actually have a certain product portfolio that is actually produced over a longer period of time, then indeed the repetitive task matters more. I think a lot of industries challenge with significantly faster turnover in their product portfolio. Even in the project business, this is where it actually all starts. That's where you actually need these other profiles. So I would say it depends a little bit in which segment you are, but the automation part is something that is meanwhile solved by a lot of organizations.
I hope that's a good answer to your question, Silke. The next question is from Taylor Mosenson. What are the types of competencies needed to shift from an operational buyer to a data scientist or data translator or insight team?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big challenges. I think we see at the moment the challenge that it simply takes too long to educate and train a traditional operational buyer with all of this new digital data things. That's why we believe it is very important that procurement leaders think a lot about collaborations and exchanging with other functions, not only internally, but in particular, obviously, with IT. And we believe very much in this agile development where you're combining traditional operational buyers with the pure data people, scientists, data translators. And as they learn in projects on categories and on RFPs, on certain procurement tasks, they will then become the ambassadors and then can further roll it out. But it's one of the big challenges, how quickly can you actually ramp this up? And the only advice I can give is just doing it internally without, so to say, taking people from other organizations or other functions. It will probably take too long. Speed is of the essence here.
So you're going, your advice would be to retrain personnel you already have to become, for instance, data analysts then?
I would train them together with people I take from somewhere else, who are, so to say, the digital or data experts. And then we always assign them, we'll have them work together in joint projects.
Yeah.
And as they learn, the procurement person then can take it on for the next one, and where he or she can actually then adopt it again. So this is a little bit of this, you need to first go and see this for the first time, being trained, and then you can actually roll it out yourself.
Yeah. It's quite a challenge, but yeah, great advice.
Yeah, the people development is the key challenge, as some other colleagues talked about before. And that's where we see the differentiation of the real leaders, but will be very much around how quickly can you actually build up the capabilities.
Yeah, so I think we're heading to the last question now. And that's a question from Alexander Orchard. And the question is technology really ready for procurement moving into a space they have considered more within their domain?
Yeah, I think I think it really varies. I think there's some procurement organizations these days who are struggling with this cross-functional interfaces for lots of different reasons. We can just say that the opportunity in many industry is clearly there. And that's where you will also see, so to say, another differentiation in the future, right? There are some who actually are moving faster into the space. Some others will still focus on the procurement opportunities only. I'm not saying they are not attractive. All I'm saying is there is a next step that will follow afterwards.